What would you do if the seat you paid for your place, your dignity was taken from you in front of hundreds of strangers? What if, in that moment, the world told you that you did not belong, even though you had earned every right to be there? This is not just a story about a flight. It is about a woman, Dr. Naomi Carter, whose quiet strength would collide with the arrogance of an airline crew, the blindness of corporate power, and the heavy shadow of prejudice at 30,000 feet. It began with one humiliating confrontation in Seat 2A, but within hours, it spiraled into chaos that shook an entire airline, rattled its boardroom, and forced a nation to look in the mirror. How far will someone go to protect their dignity? How much is a billion-dollar deal worth when humanity is at stake? And what happens when the quietest passenger becomes the loudest voice for change? Stay with us, because what happened on Flight 762 is more than a scandal. It's a reckoning. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss the powerful stories we bring to life. Now, let's step onto the plane. The cabin of Western Skies Airlines Flight 762 was already humming with the restless sounds of boarding. Overhead bins clicked shut, children fidgeted in their seats, and the faint scent of coffee lingered in the air. It felt like any other late-morning flight from New York to Dallas, until one voice cut through the ordinary noise like a whip. "Get your stuff and move. You don't belong in this seat." The words came sharp and unmistakable. Flight attendant Becky Lang stood with one hand planted firmly on her hip, the other pointing toward the aisle as if directing traffic. Her blonde ponytail swayed with the movement. Her face tightened in disgust. Passengers within earshot stopped mid-conversation, heads tilting toward the commotion unfolding in first class. The target of her words was Dr. Naomi Carter, who sat calmly in seat 2A. Naomi wore a tailored navy blazer over a cream blouse, her hair pulled neatly back, a pair of slim glasses perched on her nose. On the tray table in front of her, a leather briefcase rested half open, a silver pen lying across neatly stacked documents. To anyone watching closely, she looked like a professional preparing for another busy workday. But Becky wasn't looking closely. She was looking through Naomi, as if the very sight of her sitting in first class was offensive. Naomi's dark eyes lifted slowly from her laptop screen. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the silence hang between them. Passengers in the row ahead shifted in their seats, trying to catch a glimpse. A child's voice whispered, "Mom, why is she yelling?" The mother pulled the child close, murmuring something that didn't carry over the sudden hush in the cabin. "I'm sorry," Naomi said softly, her tone even, controlled. "What exactly seems to be the problem?" Becky's voice rose louder, pitched for an audience. "The problem is you're in a first-class seat without a valid ticket. And if you don't move, I'll have security drag you out of here. We don't tolerate theft on this airline." Gasps rippled through the rows. A man in 1C lowered his newspaper. A woman in 2B, phone already in hand, opened her Instagram app and, almost instinctively, began to record. The red light blinked live. "Western Skies Discrimination," she typed as a caption. 3 viewers joined instantly. Naomi blinked once, slowly, as if steadying herself. The accusation was absurd. Her boarding pass was tucked neatly into her jacket pocket, and she had presented it only minutes ago to the gate agent. But the venom in Becky's words wasn't about paper or ink. It was about appearance, assumption. Naomi knew it. Everyone in earshot knew it, even if they didn't say it aloud. "Would you like to see my boarding pass again?" Naomi asked, her voice still calm, still polite. Becky leaned forward, snatching the paper from Naomi's hand when she produced it. She held it under the overhead light, squinting, turning it over as though searching for invisible ink. She sucked her teeth loudly. "These online scams," she muttered, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "People print fake tickets all the time. It's pathetic." The word pathetic seemed to hang in the air. The man in 1C frowned. A teenager across the aisle lifted his phone higher, pretending to text but recording everything. The woman in 2B's live stream jumped from 3 viewers to 16. Comments appeared on her screen. "What's going on?" "She doesn't look suspicious at all." "That flight attendant is out of line." Naomi sat perfectly still, her hands folded on her lap, but inside her chest, a storm was brewing. Years of experience in boardrooms and negotiations had taught her patience. But patience didn't erase the sting of being singled out, humiliated before strangers. Her thoughts circled tightly. I could end this right now. I could pull out my business card, my ID, my company portfolio, and she would choke on her own words. But if I do, they'll only treat me differently because of who I am, not because of what's right. Becky handed the pass back, her eyes narrow slits of suspicion. "Yeah, this doesn't look right. I don't know how you got this seat, but I'm calling my supervisor." She pressed her radio, her voice firm. "Helen, I need you in first class. We've got a situation." The word situation carried through the cabin like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Conversations halted. Whispers replaced them. Passengers craned their necks, anxious for drama. The plane hadn't even pushed back from the gate, and already the atmosphere felt like a stage play, each person cast unwillingly into a role. Naomi inhaled deeply, then exhaled through her nose. Her hands moved to close the flap of her briefcase, concealing the documents inside the merger proposal with Western Skies Airlines, numbers stretching into the billions, her signature already marked at the bottom. She didn't want them to see it, not yet. Timing mattered, and right now, the lesson hadn't reached its climax. A ripple of tension moved down the aisle as Becky stood taller, scanning the cabin as though searching for allies. Her voice dripped disdain. "People think they can dress up, stroll into first class, and trick the system. Not on my watch." The woman in 2B, still live streaming, tilted her phone slightly to capture Naomi's face. The expression she caught was not anger, not fear, but something steadier, a quiet defiance. Naomi's gaze held level, her jaw set, her posture unbroken. It was a look that said, "I see you, I hear you, and I'm not moving." 3 rows back, a child whimpered again. A father hushed him, muttering, "It's okay, buddy, just some mix-up." But even he didn't sound convinced, because it didn't look like a mix-up. It looked like prejudice laid bare in front of an entire cabin of witnesses. The live stream count reached 59. The supervisor was coming. The drama was only beginning, and Naomi Carter, seated firmly in 2A, knew she was about to be tested in ways that would ripple far beyond this single flight. 20 minutes before Becky's voice split the cabin like glass, the boarding of Western Skies. Flight 762 had seemed ordinary. The line at the gate in LaGuardia had shuffled forward with the familiar rhythm of anxious travelers. Rolling bags thumped against shoes. Announcements buzzed overhead about delayed flights to Chicago and Orlando, and the smell of Auntie Anne's pretzels floated faintly from the concourse. At gate C-17, no one paid much attention to the tall woman standing near the front of the priority boarding lane, quietly scrolling through her phone. Dr. Naomi Carter didn't look like the kind of person who demanded attention. She wasn't dressed in flashy designer logos or dripping with jewelry. Instead, she wore a navy blazer cut to fit her athletic frame, a cream blouse, and a pair of understated black heels polished just enough to gleam. A leather briefcase with the initials N.C. etched subtly near the handle hung from her hand. She exuded the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of making decisions worth millions, sometimes billions, without ever raising her voice. The gate agent had smiled politely when Naomi handed over her boarding pass. First class, seat 2A. Welcome aboard, Dr. Carter. She scanned the ticket, the beep confirming entry. Naomi gave a small nod, tucked her phone into her blazer pocket, and moved down the jet bridge. Inside the cabin, she paused just long enough to let her eyes sweep over the first-class section. Rows of wide leather seats gleamed under dimmed overhead lights. Passengers were already settling in, stowing bags, adjusting seat belts. She found her seat at the front left corner, seat 2A, a window seat. She preferred the quiet of the window. It allowed her to lean slightly away from the aisle, cocooning herself in thought while the world bustled on the other side. She placed her briefcase gently on the seat, slid her bag into the overhead bin, and sat down. With practiced ease, she unclasped the case, retrieving her laptop and a neat stack of papers bound with a silver clip. Across the top of the first page, in bold letters, Western Skies Airlines Strategic Investment Proposal. The figure just beneath the header was enough to make any board member sweat. $1 billion. That was the size of the merger she was expected to sign off on by the end of the day. Her phone buzzed on the tray table. The caller ID read Jonathan Price, CEO of Western Skies. For the 42nd time that morning, she let it ring out. She already knew what he wanted. He wanted reassurance. He wanted confirmation that she was still with them, that her company, Carter Global Partners, was still willing to inject $1 billion into an airline that had been struggling to stay afloat. But Naomi believed in timing. She wasn't going to answer until she was ready, until she had seen enough, until she had certainty. Another buzz, another call, then a text from her assistant. Miranda, board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Merger vote still at 3. Everyone waiting on you. Naomi exhaled slowly, tapping the message closed. She had time, but not much. She opened her laptop and pulled up financial models, revenue projections, debt obligations. Numbers cascaded across the screen like a storm, but she understood them the way a conductor understands a symphony. She could hear where the notes fell flat, where the rhythm lost pace, where the harmony could be strengthened. Western Skies was bleeding cash. That much was obvious. But Carter Global could save them if the culture was worth saving. That was always her hidden metric. Numbers could be fixed, but culture was harder. Culture made or broke an investment. And for Naomi, today was about testing that culture in real time. The man in 1C cleared his throat, unfolding a crisp newspaper with the exaggerated rustle of someone who wanted to be noticed. Naomi caught a glimpse of the headline, Tech Stocks Rebound After Rocky Quarter. He glanced at her once, his eyes flicking toward her papers, then quickly back to the page as if the sight of her didn't compute. She offered a polite nod. He returned nothing. She smiled faintly to herself, turning back to her work. Not unusual. She had learned long ago that many people didn't expect someone who looked like her to occupy the same space as they did. It was a lesson she had learned painfully, but one that had shaped her into the strategist she was. Seat 2B filled with a woman in her 30s, hair tied back, phone already in hand. She chewed gum loudly, glanced once at Naomi, and returned to scrolling. Naomi noticed the red manicure tapping rapidly against the screen as she typed. She didn't think much of it at the time, Later, she would realize those fingers had started a live stream that would be viewed by tens of thousands. Naomi's phone buzzed again. 47 missed calls from Jonathan Price's office. She pressed ignore. She needed focus. She needed to stay in her calm center. She placed her pen against the page and began scribbling notes in the margin. Cost to revenue ratio unsustainable. Pilot contract renewals high risk. Cultural assessment pending. That last note she underlined twice. Cultural assessment pending. Because no matter how strong the numbers looked, Naomi knew one truth: a company's internal culture could destroy it faster than debt. It was why she insisted on experiencing Western Skies firsthand as a passenger, not just as an investor. If they treated her with dignity, she might trust them with her money. If they didn't, well, that would tell its own story. The boarding process continued. Luggage banged against bins, voices murmured. The usual chorus of settling in filled the space. Naomi sipped water from a small plastic cup, her eyes moving between the spreadsheet on her screen and the notes in her folder. She adjusted her glasses, her posture relaxed, but her mind razor-sharp. She thought briefly of her mother, who used to tell her as a child, "You will have to be twice as good, Naomi. Just to be seen as enough." Those words had burned into her memory, fueling her through Harvard Business School, through the founding of Carter Global, through every negotiation where men twice her age had tried to talk over her. She had built her empire on composure, on never letting them see her shaken. And here she was again, Seat 2A, about to be tested in a way she hadn't predicted, but had always anticipated. Becky Lang entered the first-class cabin with the purposeful stride of someone who enjoyed authority in small doses. She began her pre-flight checks, eyes scanning the passengers. Naomi barely noticed her at first. She was engrossed in a line item about fleet maintenance costs, but she felt it. Becky's eyes lingering, sweeping from Naomi's natural hair down to her blazer, then to her shoes. A pause that lasted a fraction too long. Naomi didn't look up, but she felt it like static against her skin. The woman in 2B adjusted her phone, tilting the camera just slightly. She had no idea yet that she was about to become the narrator of a viral story. The man in 1C folded his paper again, peeking sideways. Naomi clicked her pen softly against the margin of her notes. Small signs, small tensions, the kind she had seen before, the kind that often led to something bigger. She glanced once at the boarding door. Still open, passengers still trickling in. A captain's voice called from the cockpit. Something about departure clearance in 15 minutes. Naomi returned her gaze to her screen. She straightened the corner of the proposal page, underlining again the phrase cultural assessment pending. Then Becky's shadow fell across her tray table. "Excuse me," Becky said, her voice clipped, rehearsed, already carrying that edge reserved for problem passengers. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Naomi looked up, expression steady. Her mind whispered her mother's words again. Twice as good. Calm. Naomi. Always calm. And that was the moment the trajectory of Flight 762 shifted forever. The first signs of trouble often arrive quietly, like a shift in the air before a storm. For Naomi Carter, it began with the way Becky Lang held her boarding pass. The flight attendant tilted it one way, then another, as though hidden ink might suddenly appear under the cabin light. Her lips pursed, and a tiny crease formed between her brows. To an untrained observer, it might have looked like careful inspection. To Naomi, it looked like doubt laced with disdain. Naomi sat still, hands folded in her lap, watching the ritual. She knew the ticket was legitimate. She had purchased it weeks ago through Western Skies' own corporate portal. paying with Carter Global's executive account. She had no reason to worry, yet the way Becky's eyes flicked from the paper to Naomi's face, then back again, stirred something deeper than concern. It was the look of someone not verifying information, but verifying whether the person in front of them deserved to be where they were sitting. Becky's voice came loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. This doesn't look right. She turned the boarding pass over once more, shaking her head. I've seen counterfeits better than this. The man in seat 1C lowered his newspaper. His gaze slid sideways, curious but detached, like a spectator watching a performance. The woman in 2B adjusted her phone, screen angled discreetly toward Naomi and Becky. The live stream viewer count crept upward, from 16 to 29. In the back rows, heads turned subtly, conversation stilled. Everyone could feel the shift, that electric prickle that precedes conflict. Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying her breath. Her instinct was to respond firmly, to demand respect, to remind this young woman that assumptions had no place in customer service. But another instinct urged patience. She thought of the merger documents resting in her briefcase. She thought of Jonathan Price's frantic calls. She thought of her own note scrawled across the proposal page, cultural assessment pending. And so, she chose silence, letting Becky dig her own trench. Becky thrust the ticket back into Naomi's hand with a sharp flick of her wrist. I'll need to verify this with my supervisor. Something's not adding up. She raised her voice deliberately. Ladies and gentlemen, we may have a seating issue here. Please bear with us. The announcement wasn't necessary, but it served a purpose. It planted suspicion, watered by tone, fertilized by prejudice. Naomi felt the weight of eyes pressing against her skin. She shifted her pen on the tray table, a tiny movement, the only outward sign of tension. Inside, she battled a swirl of emotions: irritation, sorrow, and something heavier, something that had followed her all her life. The question that echoed in every corner of her memory. Do I belong? The child across the aisle whispered to his father. Why are they looking at her? The father muttered back. Just a mistake. Buddy, don't worry. But even as he said it, his voice lacked conviction, because it didn't look like a mistake. It looked like something uglier, something people rarely admitted aloud. Naomi lifted her chin and spoke, her tone calm, her diction precise. Would you like to see my identification as well? I can provide it. Becky smirked faintly, the kind of smirk that dismissed professionalism. We'll get to that. Just sit tight. She pressed her radio. Helen, can you come up front? We've got a possible fraudulent ticket in first class. The word fraudulent carried like a slap across the cabin. Fraudulent. A thief. A liar. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her eyes never wavered. She thought of her mother's voice, whispering across decades. You will be tested. Always twice as hard. Always twice as long. Show them who you are without raising your voice. The woman in 2B's live stream hit 73 viewers. Comments scrolled quickly. She looks calm. Why is the flight attendant so hostile? This is messed up. The phone tilted slightly, catching Naomi's composed face and frame. She didn't know it yet, but millions of strangers would soon see that expression. The calm before eruption. A bead of sweat prickled at the back of Becky's neck. She wasn't used to being challenged silently. Passengers usually stammered, pleaded, argued. This one just sat there, looking at her with eyes too steady, posture too unyielding. It unsettled her. And so, like many people when unsettled, she doubled down. I don't know how you got this ticket, Becky announced. still loud enough for the front rows to hear. But first class isn't for everyone. Some people try to sneak in with discount site scams. It happens all the time. The words struck Naomi like tiny daggers. Not for everyone. She let them settle in her chest. Familiar. Bitter. She thought of the first time she had been mistaken for an assistant instead of the executive she was. She thought of the times she had been asked to prove her credentials in boardrooms where others were simply believed. She thought of all the ways she had been told, subtly or bluntly, "You don't belong here." And she decided, in that moment, she would let this play out. Because the truth wasn't about her. It was about them. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. The man in 1C cleared his throat, opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again. The tension had grown thick, a fog clinging to the cabin. The captain's voice drifted faintly from the cockpit about departure clearance, but no one listened. All attention was riveted on row 2. Naomi leaned back slightly, her gaze steady on Becky. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, almost gentle. "You should be careful about the assumptions you make. They often reveal more about you than they do about me." Becky's cheeks flushed. The smirk faltered. She tightened her grip on the radio. "Helen will handle this," she snapped, though her voice cracked with something less certain than before. The live stream jumped to 100 viewers. Comments exploded across the screen. "She's handling this with grace. The flight attendant is out of line. Is this Western Skies?" Someone tagged them. Naomi glanced once at her phone, which buzzed again with Jonathan Price's name. She ignored it. Instead, she focused inward, reminding herself why she was here. This wasn't just a flight. It was a test, and the results were already writing themselves in real time. The aisle grew hushed as footsteps approached. Supervisor Helen Brooks was on her way. Naomi felt the shift again, that tightening before escalation. She pressed her fingertips lightly against the folder on her tray, steadying herself with its weight. $1 billion rested inside. But in this moment, the true cost was far greater. It was the cost of dignity, the cost of truth, the cost of proving once again that belonging wasn't a gift others granted her. It was something she carried within herself, unshakable, undeniable. And as Helen's shadow appeared at the edge of the aisle, Naomi Carter prepared herself for the storm that was about to break. The tension in the cabin grew heavier with every passing second. Becky Lang stood rigid in the aisle, her arms crossed, her eyes darting between Naomi Carter and the passengers who were now openly watching. She didn't see them as witnesses. She saw them as an audience. And in her mind, she was still in control of the stage. But the shifting glances, the whispers, the faint glow of phones recording told another story. Her control was slipping, whether she realized it or not. The footsteps came first, firm against the carpeted aisle, then the sight of a woman in her late 50s, hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to lift the lines around her face. Helen Brooks carried herself like someone who had seen everything before and dismissed most of it as unimportant. A pair of reading glasses dangled from a thin silver chain around her neck, bouncing slightly as she walked. Her uniform was crisp, every crease sharp, her posture ramrod straight. Authority clung to her like perfume. "What seems to be the problem here?" Helen asked, though her eyes never landed on Naomi. They rested squarely on Becky, as if Naomi herself were invisible. "This passenger," Becky said, her tone sharp, "is occupying seat 2A with what looks like a fraudulent ticket. I thought it best to escalate before departure." Helen gave a curt nod, her lips tightening. She turned finally, letting her gaze sweep over Naomi. It wasn't a look of curiosity, nor professionalism. It was an evaluation, as though she were cataloging details that had nothing to do with a boarding pass. Naomi's hair, her skin, her shoes, even the faint monogram on her briefcase, all absorbed in a second too long. "I see," Helen said slowly. "Ma'am, I'll need to verify your identification and method of payment." Naomi met her eyes. There was no anger in her expression, no panic, just calm, deliberate composure. "Of course," she replied. She reached into her purse, retrieved her driver's license and a sleek black credit card, and handed them over. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't rise. Every movement was measured, intentional. Helen studied the license. "Dr. Naomi Carter," she read aloud, stressing the title in a way that dripped with disbelief. "And what kind of doctor are you?" Exactly, Naomi's tone stayed even. "I hold a Ph.D. in economics from Harvard Business School." A short, derisive laugh slipped from Becky before she could stop herself. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." The man in 1C shifted uncomfortably, his newspaper folded on his lap, now forgotten. He looked from Becky to Naomi, then back again. His lips parted as though he wanted to interject, but something held him back. Fear of confrontation, perhaps, or fear of being wrong. The woman in 2B, meanwhile, kept her phone steady, her live stream chat climbing rapidly. Over 300 viewers now, comments piling in faster than she could read. Words like disgusting, biased, unprofessional lit up her screen. Helen ignored Becky's outburst, though the faint curl of her lips suggested approval. She turned back to Naomi, holding the license and credit card like they were counterfeit bills. "We've seen a lot of scams lately," Helen said. Her voice pitched for the rows around them. People printing fake tickets, stealing credit cards. It's our job to protect our paying customers. Naomi spoke quietly, but her voice carried in the tense silence. "I am a paying customer, and I would like to be treated as one." Her restraint only seemed to irritate Helen further. Authority often thrives on resistance. It flounders in the face of calm defiance. "Attitude like that," Helen snapped, "doesn't help your case. Passengers who argue usually have something to hide." A sharp pang pressed against Naomi's ribs, but she kept her breathing steady. Inside, though, her thoughts churned. She could reveal her status right now. She could mention Carter Global, the billion-dollar deal, the fact that her name was probably flashing across Jonathan Price's phone as he paced an office hundreds of miles away. She could silence this woman with a single sentence. But then what? They would apologize to her, and nothing would change for anyone else. The lesson would be lost, and so she sat still, letting Helen's words echo like accusations in the heavy air. The live stream ticked past 700 viewers. The comments section burned. Someone had tweeted a link to the stream with the hashtag "Our Western Skies Discrimination." Others were tagging news outlets, journalists, even Western Skies' corporate account. The story was no longer contained within the cabin. It was spreading like wildfire through the digital world outside. The hum of whispers in first class grew louder. "Is it really fake? She looks legit. Why are they making such a scene?" The businessman in 1C finally spoke, his voice sharp with impatience. "Excuse me, but I have a connecting flight." "Can we resolve this quickly?" Helen turned on him with practiced authority. "Sir, please remain seated. We'll handle the situation." Handling what situation, he shot back. "I saw our boarding pass. It looked fine to me." Becky spun around, her cheeks flushed. "Sir, You don't understand. People like this. She stopped, catching herself too late. The words hung in the air, suspended, poisonous. People like this. Naomi's gaze lifted to meet Becky's, steady as stone. Her lips didn't move, but her silence spoke volumes. The passengers around them shifted uncomfortably. Even Helen's composure cracked for the briefest second before she interjected hastily. What my colleague means is that we've seen an increase in fraud lately. We have to be thorough, but the damage was done. The phrase lingered like smoke, impossible to erase. Olivia Reed's live stream surged past 1,000 viewers. Comments exploded across the screen. Did she really say people like this racist? Call a lawyer. The world outside the cabin was watching, and judgment was swift. Naomi folded her hands gently on her lap. Her phone buzzed again, Jonathan Price's name glowing against the screen. She ignored it once more. The calls could wait. This moment could not. Helen pressed her radio. Security to gate C-17. We have a passenger refusing to comply. Possible fraud case. She returned Naomi's ID and card with a curt flick of her wrist, as if the act itself were distasteful. Then she stepped back, arms crossed, chin high. Naomi glanced at her open briefcase, at the papers inside, the bold header visible even at a glance. Western Skies Strategic Investment. She thought of the irony, the bitter humor of it all. They were treating her like a criminal, while her signature alone had the power to save their airline. A quiet, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Not a smile of joy, but of recognition. She was seeing the truth she had suspected all along, laid bare without disguise. The cabin had become theater. Every eye was fixed on her, every ear tuned to the unfolding script. Children stared wide-eyed. Adults whispered, phones recorded, and Naomi Carter sat silently in 2A, waiting for the next act. She knew it was coming. She could feel the storm building, every second drawing her closer to the moment when silence would no longer protect anyone. Not her, not them, not Western Skies Airlines. And when the storm broke, she would be ready. The request for security changed everything. It was as if a single word had set the air pressure inside the cabin to drop. Security. That word, spoken over the radio, reshaped the way passengers looked at Naomi Carter. It was no longer just doubt or curiosity. It was suspicion, sharpened by fear. And fear, she knew, could spread faster than truth. Naomi sat still in her seat, her driver's license and card now back in her possession. The simple act of Helen Brooks handing them back should have closed the matter. But the accusation lingered, thicker than the recycled air filling the cabin. People whispered. A mother held her child closer. The businessman in 1C shook his head, clearly agitated but unwilling to press further. Only Olivia Reed, in 2B, kept her phone steady, documenting everything. Her live stream ticked past 2,000 viewers, comments flowing so fast they blurred. Naomi could almost hear the chatter through the phone. Anger, outrage, disbelief. But in the confined space of the aircraft, she heard something else. The soft, cutting sound of doubt taking root in strangers' minds. Helen remained in the aisle, her posture firm, her voice sharp as she repeated the official narrative. We are waiting for security to verify the situation. Everyone, please stay calm. Stay calm. The words echoed bitterly in Naomi's chest. They were not meant for her, but they were about her. Every syllable suggested that her presence alone was reason for alarm. Naomi drew in a breath, steady, deliberate. She reminded herself of the folder in her briefcase, of the billion-dollar decision she still held in her hand. She reminded herself that calm was her armor, patience her weapon, yet beneath the calm surface, her thoughts tumbled with an ache that was too familiar. It was happening again. Another stage, another set of eyes, another performance of the same story. Doubt her, question her, strip her of dignity first, then ask for explanations later. She thought of her mother again, telling her that life would not give her the luxury of outrage, that her silence, her poise, would sometimes be her only defense. But silence, Naomi realized, was also a cage. Becky Lang, meanwhile, leaned slightly closer to Helen, her voice pitched low, but not low enough. You saw the way she looked at me, entitled, like she owned the place. Helen's lips tightened, her gaze still fixed on Naomi. Passengers who carry themselves like that often think the rules don't apply to them. The comments on Olivia's stream told another story. Hundreds of voices were already condemning what was unfolding. She showed ID. They're profiling her. This is racism, plain and simple. Some were calling for lawyers, others tagging journalists. But none of that noise reached Naomi in the moment. All she felt was the suffocating heaviness of being cornered while the people around her debated her worth. She looked around at the passengers. Most avoided her gaze, pretending interest in their phones, their magazines, their children. A few watched openly, their faces pinched with discomfort, sympathy, or simple curiosity. None spoke. Not yet. Naomi's voice, when it came, was soft but steady. I have complied with every request. You have my identification. You have my boarding pass. What more would you like? Helen crossed her arms. What I would like, Dr. Carter, is for security to arrive so they can determine whether you belong in this seat or not. Belong. The word struck Naomi harder than the accusation of fraud. It wasn't about a ticket anymore. It was about existence, about who was allowed to sit here, to travel here, to occupy space without suspicion. For the first time, Naomi felt her composure slip, just slightly, a flicker of heat behind her eyes, a pulse quickening in her throat. She placed her palm flat on the folder in her briefcase, grounding herself. She could not afford to unravel. Not here, not with every camera watching, every word amplified beyond the cabin. The businessman in 1C leaned forward again, this time unable to contain his irritation. For God's sake, the woman has shown you everything. Let her be. Helen turned, her voice clipped. Sir, please refrain from interfering. This is a matter of procedure. Procedure? He barked, his voice rising. Your procedure looks a lot like harassment to me. The passengers stirred, shifting in their seats, whispering more openly now. Olivia's live stream surged again. Thousands now tuned in. Some passengers noticed the phone angled toward the scene and realized the world outside was watching. A few adjusted their postures, suddenly aware they were part of something larger than just an uncomfortable delay. Becky bristled, defensive. With all due respect, sir, you don't know what kind of scams we deal with. Naomi turned her head, finally letting her eyes lock with Becky's. There was no anger in her expression, only clarity. The only scam happening here, she said quietly, is the story you are telling yourself about who I am. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. Becky's mouth opened, then closed. Helen stiffened, her authority momentarily shaken. The passengers leaned in, sensing the truth cut through the pretense. But before anyone could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed up the jet bridge. Security had arrived. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She could feel her heart knocking against her ribs, a slow, steady drumbeat of warning. This was the moment she had feared, and the moment she had anticipated. The humiliation was no longer just in the words spoken. It was in the spectacle itself, in the performance of dragging her humanity into question. The uniformed figures appeared in the aisle. Officer Daniel Harris, broad-shouldered, silver hair cut close, eyes narrowed with practiced suspicion. And behind him, Officer Emily Tran, younger, sharper, her expression less certain, flickering with unease. The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted yet again, passengers recoiling slightly as though the presence of security confirmed danger. Naomi felt it in their stares, in the collective inhale of the cabin. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It had become an accusation staged for all to see. Helen gestured toward Naomi with a sharp tilt of her head. This is the passenger in question. Possible fraudulent ticket, refusing to comply. Emily's brow furrowed. She doesn't look like she's refusing anything. But Daniel stepped forward, his voice low, commanding, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stand up." Naomi opened her eyes, lifting her gaze to meet his. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her voice carried the weight of decades of restraint. "I am not refusing to comply. I have provided my identification, my ticket, and my payment method. All are legitimate. Why am I being asked to stand?" Daniel's jaw flexed. "Because there's a process, and until we finish it, you can't remain in that seat." Olivia's live stream surged again. 10,000 viewers now. Comments screamed across the screen. "Unbelievable. She's calm. They're hostile. This is going to explode." Naomi drew in another slow breath, her mind racing. She could fight now, reveal her power, end this charade. But she remembered her note. Cultural assessment pending. This was her answer. It was ugly, humiliating, and undeniable. And yet she knew the truth had to be seen, not told. She rose slowly from her seat, every movement deliberate, graceful, not because they demanded it, but because she chose it. And in that choice, she reclaimed a piece of her dignity. But as she stood there, surrounded by suspicion and silence, Naomi Carter knew the storm had only just begun. Naomi Carter stood in the narrow aisle, her posture tall and deliberate. She had chosen to rise on her own terms, but that did not change the sting of the demand. Around her, the cabin had transformed into an arena, each passenger now an eager or reluctant spectator. Every sound, every glance, every word became part of a story larger than herself, a story spilling beyond the confines of Western skies. Flight 762 into the unblinking eye of Olivia Reed's phone. Officer Daniel Harris squared his shoulders, his presence alone enough to tilt the atmosphere heavier. He was a man who carried the confidence of decades in uniform, but also the blind certainty that authority alone equaled truth. His voice carried the weight of finality when he spoke. "Ma'am, you will need to step off the plane with us so we can sort this out properly." The murmur that rippled through the passengers was sharp and uneasy. To escort someone off a plane suggested guilt, wrongdoing, even danger. Naomi could feel the suspicion tightening around her like a net. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet but clear. "I will not leave this aircraft when I have done nothing wrong. You have my ticket. You have my identification. You have no grounds to remove me." The words stirred the businessman in one seat to action again. He leaned forward, his voice firmer than before. "She's telling the truth. I saw her documents. Are you really going to drag a paying customer off because your staff decided she doesn't look the part?" Daniel's eyes snapped toward the man. His tone clipped. "Sir, remain seated. This does not concern you." But it did concern him. It concerned everyone. The silence that had dominated the cabin was now fractured by whispers, some of support, some of doubt, all of them circling the tension like vultures. Naomi could feel the energy building, a dangerous momentum pushing everything toward an inevitable eruption. Officer Emily Tran stepped forward, her voice softer, less rehearsed. "Maybe we should check the passenger manifest again. If her name is there and the payment cleared, then there's no issue." Helen Brooks' mouth tightened. She had not expected dissent from security. "We've already checked once, but fraud can slip through." Emily looked unconvinced, her eyes flicking toward Naomi. There was something in that gaze uncertainty, maybe even empathy. It was a small fracture in the wall of authority, but a fracture nonetheless. Naomi noticed it and held on to it, a reminder that not everyone here was blind. Becky Lang, emboldened by Helen's presence and Daniel's authority, spoke louder than necessary. "Look, this isn't personal, but first class is for verified passengers, and we all know some people try to game the system." Naomi turned toward her voice cutting through the rising din like a blade. "What exactly do you mean by some people? Ms. Lang." The question froze Becky in place. Her lips parted, then pressed shut. She hadn't expected to be called out so directly. Her cheeks reddened, her eyes darting to Helen for rescue. But Helen said nothing. Her gaze locked on Naomi with something almost like disdain. The silence that followed was heavier than the accusation itself. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Olivia's live stream soared to 20,000 viewers, comments flying like sparks in dry grass. Words like racism, injustice, and disgrace filled the chat. The world was watching, and the world was not forgiving. Daniel broke the silence with authority sharpened by irritation. "Enough, ma'am. You're coming with us now, or we will remove you by force." Naomi felt the pressure in her chest tighten, her pulse quickening. A choice loomed before her: comply and be humiliated further, or resist and risk escalation into violence. Neither option promised dignity. But she remembered again the note in her briefcase. Cultural assessment pending. This was the test. This was the mirror Western Skies had chosen to hold before itself. And the reflection was damning. Her voice, when it came, was low but resonant. "You can put your hands on me if you must. But know that every camera here will tell the world what happens next. And the world will remember." The line hung in the air like thunder. Even Daniel paused, his hand hovering in indecision. The certainty in her tone rattled him more than defiance ever could. He glanced back at Emily, who still hesitated, her brow furrowed with doubt. Passengers began to stir more boldly now. A woman in row 3 spoke up. "She's right. We've all seen her ticket. She belongs here," a man farther back added. "This is wrong. You can't treat people like this." The tide in the cabin shifted, small voices coalescing into a murmur of disapproval. Authority thrives on silence. It falters when the crowd speaks. Naomi could feel it, the slow but undeniable tilt of power. Helen's eyes narrowed. She sensed it too. Her voice snapped like a whip. "Passengers, please refrain from interfering. This is a matter of airline security." But the words no longer carried the weight they once had. Too many people had seen too much. Too many were whispering, recording, sharing. Naomi knew then that this moment was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone watching on the plane and beyond. Daniel straightened, his voice rising. "Last chance. Ma'am, stand down, or we'll escort you off." Naomi held his gaze, unblinking. "I already stood when you asked. I have given you everything you demanded. What you are asking now is not about procedure. It is about prejudice. And I will not validate that with silence." The businessman in 1C clapped his hands once, sharp, deliberate. A few other passengers murmured their agreement, some nodding, some raising their phones higher. The atmosphere swelled. No longer quiet compliance, but simmering resistance. Olivia Reed's phone buzzed with notifications she couldn't even keep up with. Her viewership crossed 30,000 journalists now entering the chat, demanding names, details, confirmation. She whispered into her mic, her voice trembling with awe. "This is going viral right now. Everyone is watching." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He was used to deference, not defiance amplified by thousands of voices. His hand hovered near Naomi's arm, but he hesitated, his confidence fraying. Emily's voice broke the tension. "Officer Harris, maybe we should pause. Escalating this won't help anyone." Helen bristled. "She is refusing to comply. That alone is grounds." Emily shook her head. "No. Grounds are fraud, danger, threat, none of which she has shown. This is something else." The words landed with force. Naomi felt a flicker of gratitude, quiet but fierce. One voice inside the system was daring to see her, daring to name what was happening. Daniel exhaled through his nose, the sound sharp, irritated. "Fine. We'll check the manifest again. But if her name doesn't clear, she's off." The tension did not dissipate. It simply shifted, coiled tighter, waiting for the next strike. Naomi remained standing in the aisle, every eye upon her, her dignity intact, but her patience stretched thin. She knew the confrontation had not ended. It had only reached another level. The storm was still building, and its fury was yet to come. The cabin of Western Skies. Flight 762 felt smaller now, compressed by the weight of tension that refused to lift. The hum of the engines outside seemed to vanish beneath the collective anticipation inside. Every passenger leaned forward, whether in curiosity or concern, waiting for the next moment that would decide whether this flight continued or unraveled completely. Naomi Carter stood tall in the aisle, calm, yet radiating a strength that unsettled those who had tried to discredit her. Her refusal to bend had shifted the air. She was no longer simply a passenger under suspicion. She was becoming the center of gravity around which the entire cabin revolved. Officer Daniel Harris adjusted his stance, his chest rising and falling with the effort of maintaining control. His hand hovered close to Naomi's arm, but something stopped him from closing the distance. Authority was second nature to him, yet the quiet certainty in Naomi's voice had chipped away at his usual confidence. And now, with dozens of phones recording, with thousands of eyes on the live stream, hesitation had entered the picture where none had existed before. Officer Emily Tran's voice broke the silence first. "Let's run the manifest again. If her name is there, this should end." Daniel didn't reply right away. His jaw flexed, his nostrils flared, but he didn't move. He had expected this to be simple order given, order obeyed. Instead, he was standing in a pressurized cabin surrounded by passengers whose murmurs grew louder with each delay. Helen Brooks, unwilling to let her grip on authority falter, stepped closer, her voice sliced through the noise. "This delay is unacceptable. If she refuses to leave willingly, we will have to remove her. Passengers need to learn that compliance is not optional." The businessman in 1C scoffed loudly. "Compliance? She's complied more than anyone here. You're the ones dragging this circus out." His words earned a ripple of nods from nearby passengers. Even those too timid to speak found courage in his bluntness. And Naomi felt it, the subtle turning of the tide. Her humiliation, once hers alone, was becoming a shared discomfort, a mirror forcing every passenger to confront the unfairness laid bare before them. Naomi's voice came next, steady but edged with steel. "You are not asking me to comply with rules. You are asking me to surrender my dignity. There is a difference." The cabin quieted at her words. Even Becky Lang, who had been fidgeting nervously in the corner of the aisle, froze. The sentence cut deep, sharp enough to sting not just those who had targeted her, but those who had remained silent. Emily cleared her throat, her tone firmer now. "She's right. We've checked her documents. They're valid. She has a right to this seat." Helen spun on her, eyes flashing. "And you think you can override my authority?" Officer Tran Emily didn't flinch. "I think the evidence overrides your assumption." For the first time, the supervisor faltered. Her lips pressed tight. The certainty in her voice splintered. Becky's gaze darted anxiously between Helen and Emily, her earlier bravado fading under the weight of the confrontation she herself had sparked. Daniel finally spoke, his voice gruff. "We'll call dispatch, double-check everything. But until then, Dr. Carter, you'll need to step aside." "No," Naomi answered, her voice low but unyielding. "I will not step aside for prejudice dressed up as procedure." Her refusal sent a jolt through the cabin. Some passengers gasped softly. Others nodded with admiration. Olivia Reed's phone buzzed nonstop, 40,000 people now watching. Her live stream a direct artery to the digital veins of outrage. The breaking point arrived not with a shout, but with a tremor in Naomi's voice that only those closest could hear. She had carried herself with strength, with composure, but inside her chest, something ached. The question she had carried for years rose again. How many times must she prove she belonged? How many times would her dignity be weighed, measured, and doubted? Her inner voice whispered of her mother's lessons: be strong, be composed, be unshakable. But another voice, quieter and older, reminded her that strength was not silence, that sometimes strength meant refusing to shrink any further. She looked at the passengers around her, their eyes darting, their voices hushed. Then she spoke louder, her words carrying across the cabin. "Look at me. Look at how quickly I am turned into a suspect. Look at how easily my worth is questioned. If it can happen to me, it can happen to any of you. And if you stay silent now, it will." The cabin erupted not into chaos, but into murmurs of agreement. The businessman clapped again, this time joined by a woman in row 3 who raised her voice. "She's right. Enough is enough." A man in row 5 muttered, "This is disgraceful." And others, emboldened, echoed their disapproval. Daniel's authority wavered in the noise. He was a man used to silence, to quiet obedience, but this chorus unsettled him. Emily's eyes darted between Naomi and the crowd, her features softening as she realized the tide had fully turned. Helen tried to wrestle it back. "Passengers, quiet down, or we will have to remove more than just one of you." But her threat sounded hollow now. The crowd had tasted its own voice, and it would not retreat into silence so easily. Naomi remained steady, though inside her chest her heart pounded. She had chosen this moment, this risk, but the vulnerability of it still stung. She knew she stood not only for herself, but for the truth the airline was desperate to suppress. Daniel finally raised his radio. His voice betrayed the first signs of uncertainty. "Dispatch, we need confirmation on a passenger manifest. Name doctor. Naomi Carter. The static reply crackled back. Distant, but clear enough for those nearest to hear. Confirmed. Passenger Carter's verified for seat 2A. Payment cleared. Manifest updated. The words fell into the cabin like thunder. Every passenger heard them. Some let out sighs of relief. Others muttered in disbelief. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, drawing in a breath that steadied her shaking core. She had been validated. Yes, but at a cost that words could not repay. Emily straightened, her tone clipped but resolute. She's cleared. There is no fraud, no violation. Naomi opened her eyes, her voice calm, measured, but heavy with meaning. It took all of this, all of you, all of these cameras, all of these witnesses, just to confirm what I told you from the beginning. The truth of it echoed painfully. Passengers exchanged looks, some ashamed, some angry, most unsettled by the reflection cast back at them. Daniel stepped back slightly, chastened. Emily nodded subtly in Naomi's direction, a silent acknowledgement of her endurance. But Helen's face hardened, her pride unwilling to yield, even as the facts stripped her argument bare. Becky Lang looked at the ground, her cheeks flushed, the reality of her words and actions sinking into the silence around her. She had not just questioned a passenger. She had lit a fire that now threatened to engulf her entire crew. Naomi lowered herself back into seat 2A, each movement deliberate, dignified. She adjusted her briefcase, rested her hand on the folder inside, and lifted her chin once more. She had reclaimed her place, but the battle was not over. The storm still roared, not in the cabin now, but in the wider world. And she knew that when they landed, the real reckoning would begin. The static reply confirming Naomi Carter's seat should have been the end of it. It should have closed the chapter neatly, like the slam of a book, but the truth was rarely so tidy, and dignity rarely returned without scars. The cabin remained hushed after dispatch's confirmation, an uneasy silence that carried the residues of everything that had been said and done. Naomi sat again in seat 2A, her posture unbroken, her gaze steady on the seat back in front of her. She had been vindicated, but vindication was not the same as respect. Passengers shifted in their seats, some looking at Naomi with a newfound awareness, others avoiding her eyes altogether. A woman in row 3 whispered audibly to her companion, "I can't believe they put her through all that." A man in row 5 muttered, "They treated her like a criminal." The murmurs built, weaving a tapestry of shame and discomfort that filled the air. Olivia Reed, still holding her phone, whispered into her stream. 45,000 watching now. Everyone just heard dispatch clear her. This is going everywhere. The scrolling comments reflected outrage sue the airline. Never flying with them again. This is history happening live. Officer Daniel Harris stepped back, his authority shaken, though his posture still clung to a facade of command. He spoke, but his voice had lost some of its iron edge. "The matter has been verified. You may return to your duties." His words sounded hollow, stripped of the dominance he had once wielded. Naomi did not reply. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more weight than any rebuttal. Officer Emily Tran lingered for a moment longer, her eyes softening as she glanced at Naomi. She wanted to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps solidarity, but the uniform bound her tongue. Instead, she offered the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, before following Daniel down the aisle. Helen Brooks remained, her arms crossed, her jaw set. The manifest confirmation had robbed her of her authority, but pride refused to let her step back. Her voice came cold, clipped. "Very well. But this delay has caused unnecessary disruption." Naomi turned her head slowly, her gaze piercing through the thin veil of professionalism. "The disruption was not caused by me." The words landed sharp, undeniable. Helen opened her mouth to respond, but the businessman in 1C beat her to it. "She's right. You dragged this out when it should have ended an hour ago." Passengers murmured in agreement. The weight of collective disapproval pressed on Helen, though she stood rigid, unwilling to bow. Becky Lang, standing just behind her, looked down at the floor, her face red with the humiliation of having lit the spark. The captain's voice finally broke through the cabin speakers, calm, practiced, carrying a note of irritation beneath the veneer of professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We apologize for the delay. The matter has been resolved, and we will be departing shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The announcement did little to soothe the unease. The engines roared to life. The cabin lights dimmed, and yet the air remained heavy with what had transpired. Naomi felt every vibration of the aircraft as it taxied, each jolt through the wheels a reminder of the ground she had stood upon only moments earlier. As the plane lifted into the sky, the hum of flight filled the silence. Passengers settled, but not into comfort. It was the kind of silence that follows a public reckoning, when people retreat into their own minds to wrestle with what they have witnessed. Naomi leaned back, her hand resting lightly on her briefcase. Inside was the folder that still held the fate of Western Skies Airlines. A billion-dollar deal, contingent not only on numbers and logistics, but on trust, on cultural alignment, on the very values the company claimed to hold. She thought of the board members waiting in Dallas, expecting her signature. They would never imagine the turbulence she had endured before even reaching the ground. Her eyes closed briefly, exhaustion threatening to seep through her composure, but her thoughts refused to rest. She replayed the humiliation, the insinuations, the word belong hanging heavy in her chest. And yet, through it all, she replayed too the voices that had risen in her defense. The businessman, the woman in row 3, the passengers who had refused to remain silent, and Emily Tran's hesitant but courageous dissent. It was not enough to erase the wound, but it was something. Proof that truth could crack through even the thickest walls of prejudice. Olivia leaned closer from seat 2B, lowering her phone at last. "They're still watching," she whispered. "Tens of thousands. You handled that with... I don't even know how to describe it. Grace. Fire. Both." Naomi opened her eyes, turning to meet Olivia's earnest gaze. "I didn't want to handle it at all, but sometimes the choice isn't ours." Olivia nodded slowly, her own eyes glistening. "The world saw. That matters. It really matters." Naomi looked away, out the window, where clouds stretched endless and white against the deep blue. She wanted to believe that seeing mattered, that witnessing was enough. But she also knew that change came not from being seen, but from holding people accountable. The flight settled into routine. The attendants moved through the aisles with carts, their smiles tight, their voices rehearsed. Becky avoided Naomi's row entirely, her shame still fresh, her confidence shattered. Helen walked past once, her gaze sliding over Naomi without acknowledgement. It was avoidance, not apology, and Naomi recognized it for what it was. When the seatbelt sign flicked off, the cabin buzzed with cautious conversation. Some passengers leaned toward Naomi, offering words of support. A man from row 4 whispered, "We've got your back." A young woman from farther down said softly, "You inspired me." Naomi responded with nods, polite gratitude, but inside she felt the weight of their admiration press against the exhaustion in her bones. Her mind wandered to Dallas, to the boardroom, to the contract waiting with eager hands. They would not know that the decision had already been made, not in spreadsheets or negotiations, but in the cramped cabin of Flight 762. Their billion-dollar deal had unraveled the moment Western Skies failed its own test. Naomi adjusted in her seat, pressing her palm once more against the briefcase. She would carry the scars of this flight with her into that boardroom, into every conversation that followed. And though she remained calm on the surface, inside she felt the storm still raging, unresolved, demanding an outlet. For now, she gave herself permission to breathe. Just breathe. The fight was not over, but she had survived the breaking point, and in surviving, she had turned humiliation into testimony. The plane cut through the sky, engine steady, as if nothing extraordinary had happened inside its cabin. But Naomi knew better. Every passenger on board knew better. And soon, so would the world. By the time Western Skies Flight 762 leveled off above the clouds, the world outside the cabin had already shifted. While the passengers tried to settle into the rhythm of a routine flight, their minds still replaying the chaos of the confrontation. A different storm gathered across thousands of screens. Olivia Reed sat in 2B, her phone cradled tightly in her hands. The live stream counter ticked upward with a relentless momentum, climbing past 50,000 viewers, then 60. She hadn't expected this when she first hit record. She had only wanted to document what felt wrong, a moment of injustice that might otherwise vanish into silence. But now the video pulsed across the internet, a living testimony carried on waves of outrage. Dr. Naomi Carter, first-class passenger, accused of fraud despite valid documents. Security nearly dragged her off. Dispatch confirms she was right. That was the caption Olivia had typed as she clipped the footage into smaller segments during the lull after takeoff. Each clip spread faster than the last, retweeted, shared, reposted, stitched into commentary by voices large and small. Naomi sat quietly beside her, unaware of the scale of what was unfolding. She stared out the window, her reflection faint in the glass, the clouds rolling beneath her like an ocean without shore. Inside her chest, her heart still pounded with the echo of humiliation and resistance. She had stood her ground, yes, but the weight of the stares, the suspicion, the sharp bite of Becky Lang's words, all of it still clung to her like smoke. Olivia leaned closer, her voice low. "Naomi, it's everywhere already. People are furious. Reporters are messaging me. You've gone viral." Naomi turned slowly, her brows knitting. "Viral, yes," Olivia whispered, showing her the screen. "Look." Naomi's eyes scanned the flood of comments, the hashtags already forming. Rise dignity in the sky. Naomi Carter. Western Skies. Tens of thousands of voices demanding justice, recounting their own experiences, tying her story to something far larger. Her throat tightened. She had not sought an audience. She had not wanted to become a symbol. And yet here it was. The world thrusting her into the center of a narrative she could not control. "I didn't ask for this," she murmured, half to herself. Olivia shook her head, her tone urgent. "Sometimes the story chooses you, and when it does, it matters how you carry it." Naomi looked back toward the window, her reflection clearer now in the shifting light. The thought weighed heavy. She had carried many burdens in her career, in her life. Deals worth billions, boards filled with skeptical faces, Rooms where she had been the only woman of color at the table. But this was different. This was her dignity, stripped bare, broadcast to the world, down the aisle. Helen Brooks whispered fiercely to Becky Lang, their voices low but audible to those nearby. Do not speak of this again. Not to passengers. Not to anyone. Do you understand? Becky nodded quickly, her eyes wide with panic. Her earlier bravado was gone, replaced with a raw fear of exposure. She had become the face of a mistake now being dissected by tens of thousands online. Passengers around them exchanged looks, some shaking their heads. The businessman in 1C leaned toward Naomi's row, lowering his voice. They'll try to spin this, pretend it never happened. But too many of us saw. Too many of us recorded. Naomi gave him a faint nod, gratitude flickering in her tired eyes. His words were both comfort and warning. The battle was no longer confined to this cabin. It had spilled into the court of public opinion. And there, truth was messy, fragile, easily distorted. Back on the ground, the explosion spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the clips within minutes. Headlines began to roll out. Passenger humiliated on Western Skies Flight. Viral video sparks outrage over racial profiling. CEO of Carter Global Partners at center of scandal. Jonathan Price, CEO of Western Skies Airlines, sat in his corner office in Dallas when his phone lit up with the first alert. At first, he ignored it. Disruptions happened. Passengers complained. Social media exaggerated. But when the second alert came, and the third, he leaned forward. His assistant rushed in, pale-faced, holding a tablet. Sir, you need to see this. The video played. Jonathan watched as Naomi Carter stood her ground, as officers surrounded her, as passengers protested. He watched the humiliation, the strength, the line she spoke that echoed even through a screen. You are not asking me to comply with rules. You are asking me to surrender my dignity. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was not just a disruption. This was a disaster. And worse, he recognized the name. Carter Global Partners, the firm they had spent months courting, the firm about to sign $1 billion deal. His phone rang before he could catch his breath. A board member, then another, each demanding answers, each furious. Jonathan pressed his fingers to his temples, knowing the reckoning had already begun. Back in the cabin, Naomi's phone buzzed in her briefcase, dozens of messages piling up. She didn't check them. She couldn't. The noise outside would have to wait until her feet touched the ground. For now, she focused on her breathing, on the steady rhythm of the engines, on the fragile thread of calm she had managed to reclaim. Olivia glanced at her again, lowering her voice. You know this changes everything. Right? Naomi's eyes stayed on the clouds. Yes, she whispered. And not just for me. Around them, the passengers settled into uneasy quiet. Some typed furiously on their own phones, posting their perspectives, joining the storm. Others leaned back, eyes closed, trying to escape the weight of what they had witnessed. But there was no escaping it. The story had already left the cabin. Naomi Carter sat still, composed, her mind a battlefield of exhaustion and resolve. She knew what awaited in Dallas. Not just a boardroom, not just a contract, but a choice about what kind of world she wanted to help build, and what kind of injustice she could no longer tolerate. The viral explosion had begun, and its fire was not one she could contain, but perhaps, just perhaps, she could direct it. When Western Skies Flight 762 touched down in Dallas, the landing gear thudded against the runway with a finality that felt heavier than usual. The flight had lasted only a few hours. Yet for Naomi Carter, it carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of battles. She sat in 2A, her briefcase pressed firmly against her lap, her jaw tight as the plane slowed to a halt. The world outside awaited, but she knew it would not be the same world she had left behind in New York. Passengers stood, retrieving their bags, murmuring in tones that shifted between relief and unease. Naomi waited, calm, composed, letting others disembark before her. She walked down the aisle, not as someone defeated, but as someone who had withstood a storm. Olivia Reed gave her a quick hug before stepping aside. "I'll keep posting. People need to know," she whispered. Naomi only nodded, grateful but too weary for words. The terminal buzzed with the usual rhythm of arrivals, families reunited, travelers rushing to connections, announcements echoing overhead. Yet in one corner, reporters had already gathered, tipped off by the viral videos. Naomi recognized the glint of cameras, the raised microphones, but she turned away. She would not give them sound bites in the hallway of an airport. Not yet. Instead, she walked with deliberate steps to the black sedan waiting outside. Her driver opened the door, silent, professional, his expression betraying none of the chaos surrounding her name online. She slid inside, resting her head against the cool leather seat, closing her eyes for the brief ride to the Western Skies headquarters. Inside the glass tower, Jonathan Price paced his office. He had not slept. The videos had gone global overnight. Morning shows replayed them on loop. Pundits debated the deeper meaning, and shareholders demanded explanations. He had tried to prepare statements, but none felt adequate. He knew the truth. There was no containing this. The only question was how much damage it would do. When Naomi arrived, she was led to the top floor, where a long mahogany table stretched beneath unforgiving fluorescent lights. The board members of Western Skies sat stiffly in their seats, their faces pale with tension. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, his smile strained, his hand extending. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice tight. "Thank you for coming. We owe you an apology for the unfortunate events on your flight." Naomi did not take his hand. Instead, she placed her briefcase on the table, her eyes meeting his with quiet fire. "Unfortunate," she repeated softly, the single word sharper than any accusation. Jonathan cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Yes, deeply unfortunate. We will, of course, launch an internal review, disciplinary measures, sensitivity training, whatever is needed. This should not define our partnership." The board members nodded in forced agreement, but Naomi saw the fear behind their eyes. They wanted her signature on the contract. They wanted the billion-dollar deal to proceed, as if a training module could erase humiliation broadcast to millions. She opened the briefcase, pulling out the folder, laying it flat on the table. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if every gesture mattered. "I want you all to understand," she began, her voice calm but steady. "What happened on that flight is not an isolated incident. It is not a mistake made by one attendant or one officer. It is a reflection of the culture you have allowed to exist within your company." One board member, a woman with sharp glasses, interjected quickly. "Dr. Carter, please. With respect, airlines deal with difficult passengers daily. Protocols must be followed." Naomi cut her off, not with volume, but with precision. Protocol is not prejudice, and prejudice is not protocol. What happened to me was not about procedure. It was about perception. The perception that I did not belong in seat 2A. The perception that I must have stolen my place, rather than earned it. That is not protocol. That is discrimination. The room fell silent. The woman shrank slightly into her chair. Jonathan attempted to recover. His voice measured. We cannot deny the optics are bad. But surely you see this deal is about more than a single incident. We've worked for months to align our operations with Carter Global. This is an opportunity for both of us. Naomi leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. An opportunity built on what foundation numbers, logistics, or values? Because last night, your values were tested, and you failed. The words struck like blows. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Jonathan and Naomi. Jonathan tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. We can repair this. We can make it right. A public apology, compensation, whatever it takes. Naomi's voice softened, but the softness carried weight. You cannot purchase dignity. You cannot erase humiliation with a press release. The world saw what happened, and I saw too. I cannot sign my name to a partnership with a company that treats its passengers, its people, as disposable when their dignity becomes inconvenient. She slid the folder across the table. Closed. The sound of it against the wood echoed through the sterile boardroom. Jonathan stared at it as though it were a weapon. You're walking away, he asked, disbelief straining his words. Naomi rose slowly, her presence commanding even in silence. I am choosing not to walk into something that compromises everything I stand for. A ripple of tension spread across the table. Some board members whispered. Others simply sat in stunned silence. Jonathan's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as reality set in. Naomi picked up her briefcase, holding it firmly by her side. She paused at the door, turning back just once. This was never just about me. It was about every passenger who has been told they don't belong. And until you reckon with that, no partnership will save you. She left the boardroom, her heels striking the marble floor with steady rhythm, her back straight, her resolve unshaken. Jonathan collapsed into his chair, his mind racing with the fallout. He imagined the headlines. Carter Global walks away from $1 billion deal. He imagined the shareholders' rage, the collapse of months of negotiation, the stain on Western Skies' reputation that no amount of spin could erase. Naomi stepped into the sunlight outside the tower, inhaling deeply. The air tasted different here, free, sharp, alive. She had given up a deal worth $1 billion, but she had preserved something no money could buy. Her dignity, her truth, her refusal to bow to a system that demanded silence. And though she walked away alone, she knew she carried with her the voices of thousands who had watched, who had cheered, who had seen themselves in her defiance. The reckoning had begun. By the time Naomi Carter stepped out of the glass tower of Western Skies Airlines, the sun had shifted high into the sky, but the world around her no longer felt ordinary. News crews had already gathered outside, drawn by the viral flames consuming the internet. Cameras swiveled in unison, microphones thrust forward like weapons, voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. Dr. Carter, is it true? You walked away from the deal? Do you plan to sue Western Skies? Are you going to release a public statement? Naomi paused on the steps, her briefcase still in her hand. For a moment she considered silence, disappearing into the sedan waiting for her. But then she saw the faces behind the cameras, not just reporters hungry for a headline, but ordinary people who had come to watch. Some held signs hastily scribbled with markers, "Respect every passenger," "Dignity in the sky," "We stand with Naomi." Her voice carried calm authority as she addressed them. I did not walk away from a deal. I walked toward my values. What happened on Flight 762 was not about paperwork or seating charts or procedure. It was about dignity. Until Western Skies reckons with that truth, no partnership with me or my firm is possible. The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing, microphones recording every syllable. Naomi's words spread within minutes, looping across television broadcasts, streaming across social feeds, repeated in headlines that framed her as both victim and leader. Inside the building, Jonathan Price watched the live coverage with a sinking heart. The boardroom behind him buzzed with frantic voices, some demanding damage control, others predicting lawsuits, all of them aware that the company's future had shifted in a single morning. Jonathan rubbed his temples, muttering to himself, "One flight, one damn flight." But he knew it wasn't one. It never was. It was a symbol of something larger, and symbols could bring down empires. Across the country, living rooms, coffee shops, and office spaces tuned in. On morning shows, pundits debated the implications. Some applauded Naomi's courage, calling her a trailblazer, a voice for those silenced in small humiliations every day. Others, more cautious, asked whether one incident should derail a billion-dollar partnership. The debate raged, but the momentum of outrage was clear. Western Skies was hemorrhaging credibility by the hour. Naomi retreated to her hotel suite, finally allowing herself to breathe in solitude. She slipped off her shoes, setting the briefcase on the desk, and collapsed into the armchair by the window. The Dallas skyline stretched before her, but her gaze drifted inward. She thought of her grandmother, who had once told her, "Your dignity is the only inheritance no one can steal unless you let them." The words returned now, echoing like a compass in the storm. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from colleagues, from friends, from strangers who had seen her story. Some shared their own experiences of being questioned, doubted, diminished. Others offered gratitude, telling her she had spoken for them when they could not. Naomi read each one, her heart swelling with both sorrow and strength. She had become more than herself now. She had become a vessel for something larger. But with that came fear, too. Would she be reduced to this moment forever? Would all her achievements, the deals, the leadership, the years of discipline and brilliance be overshadowed by a single flight gone wrong? She wrestled with the unease, the tug between pride and exhaustion, between public role and private self. In another part of Dallas, Olivia Reed sat at a cafe, watching her phone as the view count on her video surged past 5 million. She hadn't expected this kind of response. She had only tried to capture truth, but now she was being invited onto talk shows. Her inbox flooded with requests for interviews. She hesitated, sipping her coffee, her fingers hovering over the accept button. She knew her voice mattered, but she also feared being consumed by the same fire Naomi now carried. Meanwhile, Western Skies employees whispered in corridors, their morale collapsing under the weight of scrutiny. Flight attendants scrolled through comments that condemned the company. Pilots shook their heads at the footage, and ground staff wondered aloud whether their jobs were at risk. For the first time, the airline's hierarchy seemed fragile, its glossy ads about excellence and equality exposed as hollow. Back in her suite, Naomi finally answered a call from one of her senior partners. His voice was tense, urgent. "Naomi, you've become the face of this story. Everyone's watching. The firm's reputation is rising because of you. But so are expectations. What's your next move?" She hesitated, staring out at the skyline. "My next move is not about our reputation. It's about accountability. If we reduce this to a brand opportunity, then we're no better than they are. Her partner sighed, half admiring, half concerned. That's why people follow you, Naomi, because you don't bend. As night fell, the story only grew. Protesters gathered outside Western Skies headquarters, chanting Naomi's name alongside calls for reform. Employees of the airline anonymously leaked internal memos that revealed a pattern of complaints ignored, training overlooked, biases unchecked. What had begun as one woman's humiliation now swelled into a national reckoning. Naomi watched the coverage alone in her suite, the chants echoing faintly through her television. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her skin. This was no longer about her seat on Flight 762. It was about every seat, every gate, every silent injustice endured in transit. And though fatigue weighed heavy, she understood something vital. She had not been broken by that flight. She had been sharpened by it. Tomorrow, the storm would rage louder. Tomorrow, she would face new demands, new criticisms, new expectations. But tonight, as she closed her eyes, she allowed herself one truth: she had chosen dignity, and dignity had chosen her back. Morning sunlight spilled across Dallas, painting the skyline in gold. The city stirred with its usual rhythm, but for Naomi Carter, nothing felt ordinary anymore. She sat at the small table in her hotel suite, a cup of untouched coffee cooling by her side. Her laptop glowed with headlines, each one a mirror of the storm she had stepped into. Naomi Carter walks away from billion-dollar deal. Western Skies faces backlash. After viral video, passengers demand justice. The words were sharp, relentless, yet they no longer startled her. She had made her choice, and the world was simply responding. Her phone buzzed again. Another request for an interview, another invitation to speak. Naomi ignored it. For now, she needed space to think, to breathe, to hold on to the quiet before the noise claimed her again. She turned to the window, watching the streets below. People moved with purpose, some carrying signs, others wearing T-shirts printed overnight with her name. Dignity. In the sky had become more than a hashtag. It was a movement. Across the country, passengers shared their own stories of being dismissed, profiled, humiliated. What happened on Flight 762 had cracked something open, and now the light was pouring through. A knock came at the door. Naomi rose, her bare feet soft against the carpet, and opened it to find Olivia Reed standing there. The younger woman looked tired but resolute, her phone still in her hand, as if it had become an extension of her. "I thought you might want company," Olivia said softly. Naomi stepped aside, gesturing her in. "Sit," she said. "You've been carrying this storm with me." Olivia dropped into the chair, setting her phone face down for the first time in hours. She exhaled deeply, her shoulders sagging. "I didn't expect it to get this big. I thought maybe a few people would watch, maybe someone would care. But now, it feels like everyone is watching." Naomi nodded, her expression gentle. "The truth has a way of multiplying once it's seen. You didn't just film me, Olivia. You filmed a system being exposed. People saw themselves in it." Olivia bit her lip, her voice wavering. "Do you ever worry you'll just become this, that all people will see is Flight 762, not who you are beyond it?" The question pierced Naomi. She leaned back, folding her arms across her chest, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. "Yes," she admitted. "I do. I've spent years building a career, leading teams, making deals that changed industries. And yet, one flight, one humiliation, could overshadow it all. But maybe," She paused, her voice softening. Maybe that's the price of being a symbol. You don't get to control how people see you. You only get to control what you stand for. Silence lingered between them, filled with the hum of the city below. Then Naomi reached across the table, resting her hand lightly on Olivia's. Don't let this consume you either. You did something brave, but you're more than one video. Remember that. Olivia's eyes welled, but she nodded. Thank you. Later that afternoon, Naomi walked through downtown Dallas, her stride steady. Though cameras still trailed her at a distance, people stopped her on the sidewalks, shaking her hand, thanking her. A flight attendant from another airline approached, her uniform crisp, her eyes full of quiet admiration. I've seen it happen too many times, the woman whispered. You gave us courage to speak. Naomi smiled faintly, her heart swelling. She realized then that her decision to walk away from Western Skies had not been a loss, but a liberation. By refusing to compromise, she had given others permission to demand more. Back at Western Skies headquarters, Jonathan Price faced his own reckoning. Shareholders demanded accountability, employees demanded reform, and the media hounded him relentlessly. The once proud airline now stood as a cautionary tale, its polished image shattered. Jonathan knew he would carry the stain of Flight 762 for the rest of his career. He sat in his office, staring out at the same skyline Naomi had watched, wondering when he had lost sight of what leadership meant. That evening, Naomi returned to her hotel, turning on the television only to see her own face once again. But this time, the coverage was different. The conversation had shifted. Civil rights leaders spoke about systemic change. Politicians called for stronger protections against discrimination in air travel. Everyday people debated dignity and fairness at their dinner tables. The incident had outgrown her, becoming a movement she no longer owned, but had sparked. She shut off the television, retreating to the quiet of her room. Sitting by the window, she let the darkness settle. She thought of her grandmother's words again, of the inheritance no one could steal. She thought of the countless faces she had seen in the crowd, each one carrying their own story of injustice. She thought of the weight of her name, Naomi Carter, now etched into headlines, into memory, into history. And she wondered not with fear, but with determination what she would do with that weight. The night deepened. Dallas glowed with city lights, but Naomi's gaze turned inward. She did not seek vindication. She did not seek revenge. She sought transformation. If Flight 762 had taught her anything, it was that even the smallest humiliation, left unchecked, could ripple outward until it touched the entire world. She closed her eyes, whispering into the stillness. Let this matter. Let it change something. The next morning, she would face more interviews, more cameras, more expectations. She would be asked to speak on stages, to sit on panels, to lead conversations bigger than herself. But tonight, as she finally allowed herself to rest, she carried a quiet certainty her dignity had survived the fire. And because of that, others would believe theirs could too. The legacy of Flight 762 was no longer about Naomi Carter alone. It was about every passenger who had ever been told they did not belong, every traveler who had endured indignity in silence. It was about reclaiming something fundamental: respect, humanity, truth. And somewhere high above the city, a plane cut through the night sky, its lights blinking against the darkness, a reminder that travel could connect or divide, uplift or humiliate, depending on the choices of those in power. A reminder that dignity was not a luxury, but a right. Naomi opened her eyes again, watching that plane vanish into the horizon. She felt no bitterness, only resolve. The storm had passed, but its echo would remain. Flight 762 would be remembered, not as the day Naomi Carter was humiliated, but as the day dignity refused to be silenced. And so, Flight 762 became more than a journey from New York to Dallas. It became a symbol of pain, of courage, of dignity reclaimed in the face of humiliation. Dr. Naomi Carter walked away from a billion-dollar deal, but she walked towards something greater, the truth that respect cannot be bought, and that justice begins when silence ends. We are left with questions we cannot ignore. How many times has prejudice gone unnoticed at 30,000 feet or in our daily lives on the ground? How often do we choose convenience over compassion, policy over humanity? This story reminds us that every passenger deserves more than a seat. They deserve dignity, and it calls us, all of us, to stand against the small humiliations that, when left unchecked, grow into deep wounds in our society. Let this story stay with you. Let it challenge you. Let it move you to act with respect, to speak when silence would be easier, and to believe that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, because together we can keep these voices alive, and together we can make sure stories like Flight 762 are never forgotten.